everybody. It looks and most of you know who I am now. I'm Katie. I'm the new Cultivate Coordinator here at Cedarfield. And thank you all for coming to my presentation today. We're going to be talking about winter garden cleanup, as you can see. We'll be going over the essential principles, techniques, and practices for turning any garden, not just your own, into a thriving space for you and the wildlife. As you can see, we've got some birds here enjoying some leftover winter stems. So, no birds today, all plants. So why clean up your garden? So for most of us, it's cleaning up to prepare for winter weather. We're shaping our plants for our appearance or for healthier growth. And sometimes, you just want some more tidy visuals for either you or, the neighbors. Everybody has opinions about everybody's yards. But why might you not want to clean up your garden? Because it reduces habitat for birds, bees, and other beneficial insects. As you can see, now we're relying on a cup of seeds to feed this little bird rather than the bush that we saw in the beginning. It limits those food sources for wildlife, and it reduces the insulation for our plants and organic matter for roots, as well as disturbing our overwintering insects. So the balance is, one hand, we want it to be clean and tidy and healthy, and on the other hand, we want it to be healthy and wealthy for our wildlife friends. So how can we meet in the middle here between the wild and the manicured? So what we can do is plop right down in the middle there. So that's going to be our acronym for how we remember what we need to do for our garden. So plop, just like the sound of snow falling off a branch, real simple. So plop stands for prepare, leave, observe, and prune. And you want to do it in those steps, saving pruning for last. So when we're preparing, we've got our tools ready. We've got some examples up here to show you later. And you want to know what your goals are. Are your goals to make it super clean and neat, or is the goal to bring in a lot more birds and things like that? What is most important to you when you step out that front door? So leave, I'm sure many of you have heard this before, but leave the leaves is a very popular thing to hear about, a more modern take on gardening. So that's limiting our removal of our natural things like leaves, seed heads, stems, all of that, and keeping around some winter interest, something to look at over the season. The third step is observe, and it means, looking for problems, but also looking for opportunities, where in the springtime you might be able to put in something that'll really bring you a lot of joy. And also viewing what you're providing for the space around you. It's nice to sit and watch all the birds come in, or just to see how much more activity you have than the lawn next door. And pruning, last of all, we want to remove things at the right time. Pruning at the wrong time of year can actually take away a lot of beauty, especially when we're talking about shrubs and trees. And we want to make sure that every cut we're making is done to enhance the purpose of the plant, not to just remove it or take things away. Because sometimes when you do that, you're weakening your plant. So PLOP is our acronym today. So for prepare, we want to know our goals. So when we step outside, is that goal to keep everything super manicured? What are we doing today? What's the list of things to do? Because it can get very overwhelming, especially when you're first starting your garden cleanup. Everything's a mess. All the leaves are on the ground. There's no mulch. All the plants look very droopy. So it's pick your battles. Start with a list of things that you want to do first, and keeping in mind all the steps. So when you're doing that list, you want to understand how your plants grow. Are you a rose gardener with a bunch of beautiful antique heirloom roses, or are you a wildflower gardener? That's going to inform what choices you're going to make. So, and you want to prepare your toolbox before you're outside. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone out to do a project and realized, oh, I don't have that one tool that I need, and I'm running back in, and then there's dirt all over the floor, and So just preparing yourself before you go outside can save you a lot of time. And preparing that toolbox also means doing things like this, coming to lectures, reading books, seeking out additional resources. That way you're not stressed when you're stepping out that front door. You know what your tools are, you know what you need to know, and you know what you don't know, so you're not doing anything with those plants unless you know that's what you want to do. So our essential gardening tools, we've got some up here. I'll just bring two of my favorites over here so I don't have to shout at everybody. So pruners, there's a couple different sizes of pruners. The one that I like to use the most generally is a pair of bypass pruners. bypass because the top bypasses the bottom stays stable, and these are a nice size to get in most shrubs and smaller perennials. It's not usually big enough once you start getting into like the small trees, but anything under like a 3/4 of an inch or even an inch caliper you can do with a pair of bypass pruners. If you want to get in and do some detailed pruning, I recommend a pair of needle nose pruners, which are just going to be very scissor-like. So they're going to be a lot more gentle on your hands. If you have a lot of pruning to do, a pair of bypass shears can be very heavy, so you may want to go in with something a lot lighter. And then another thing to use a lot of is a rake. I like to use hand rakes and soft rakes. I have one here.
This is a nice compact one, so it folds up and down, makes it really easy to do different sizes and things. But this is really important because you don't want to be disturbing the soil too much. I like to avoid leaf blowers if possible. So a nice soft rake like that and a little hand rake like this for getting under shrubs. Or sometimes I like to brush the grasses, get the leaves out of the grasses. So those are two good tools to have.
We have a trowel and a soil knife. I'm sure most people know what a trowel is, just a little shovel. But a soil knife, one of my favorite tools, it's going to let you dig as well as saw. We have a serrated side here and then a smooth bladed side here. This tool just is really great for getting weeds out of the ground, for getting into cracks in between cement, for getting out really tough little things, or even sawing off small branches. This is going to be great. Also for planting bulbs, it's got the inches written on the inside of the knife so that when you're in the ground you can see how far down you are planting. So soil knife or trowel, usually for winter I recommend grabbing a soil knife since you can get everything out of the small areas a lot easier. And if anybody stopped by my office recently, you've probably heard me talk about this. This is called a Dutch push hoe. And the nice thing about this is that it's meant so that you don't have to bend over while you're using it. So, that's not bent that way. So when we use it, you put it flat to the ground like this, and you just push. You're not really supposed to bend over until you're going around to pick up the weeds. And what it does is it goes underneath the mulch, and it just scrapes the top of the soil so the little weeds pop right up. So it makes it a lot easier rather than a lot of the other types of hoes where you're pulling and it puts a lot of weight on your back. This is going to really help get up those small little weeds and just not disturb the soil too much. As we'll talk about in a little bit, when you have a lot of leaf matter and soil around, there's insects and things in that. So every time we go through and disturb it, we're adding an opportunity in to disrupt that balance in the ecosystem. So this tool's great because it doesn't disturb things too much. One I don't have, but is a great tool, especially for those of you who have a lot of daylilies, is going to be a hand sickle. And so it's going to be just a little half moon, like a curved knife. And what you do is you'll grab the daylilies up top and you'll pull it, and then be really easy. It's almost like sawing, but a lot gentler. So that will really help keep the weight off your hands rather than pruning a million times. Clip, 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 clip. You just go shroop. So a lot easier. So cloth and Lysol, this is a necessary tool, especially when you're doing shrubs, because in the winter time, even though everything's dormant, not really growing, you can still transfer diseases, especially things like rose rosette, which we do have an issue with in Virginia, and things like fire blight and other stuff. So it's always good, no matter what you're doing, if you're out there hacking at a tree or something, and even if you don't suspect that it's got an infection, just to wipe off those pruners with Lysol or a 10% bleach solution. You can't tell when you have a disease on your pruners, just like we can't tell if a sneeze is somebody sick or just having allergies. It's way better to be safe than sorry, especially if you've got, roses, things like that are really special. And then speaking of roses, you're gonna want some arm shields. So not just a pair of gloves, but something that goes all the way down to your elbows, or at least halfway down your arm, because they can really rip you up even if you can see them. And a hat and sunblock. I'm sure I don't need to tell you all that if you've been gardening for a while. So even in the winter time, you need to make sure that your skin is protected. And a journal and a pen is something I always recommend keeping with you, just to make notes about things that you see or even things that you want to see. If you're like, I really hate this corner of the garden. I'm gonna make a note to do something with this next year. That way you don't have to be, every time you look at that corner, you're not reminded. You already knew, you have a plan for it, or it's in your plan to have plans for. So that journal and pen is very helpful. We're gardeners, we're always got new ideas. So if we're leaving, we wanna leave the schedule at home. This is a little different than some other garden cleanup guides where they'll say, this month you must do this, and this week you do this, and when the moon is full, you do this and that and the other. What you want is to let the weather dictate how you're going to be caring for your garden. If we go in too early and we remove a bunch of iris leaves and it stays warm into November like it did this year, I'm sure a lot of you have seen those pop back up. So if we don't want to be doing extra work, we want to be doing smart work. We want not no maintenance, but no KNOW maintenance. So that way we're doing things with knowledge, and that goes back to having that plan. So we also want to leave leaves and seeds, stems, stumps, and snags. I call it the LS4. You just want to try to leave some of the natural organic material that's present in your landscape, because a lot of times if we don't leave it, we end up paying for it down the line in another form. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We also want to leave some bare soil space. So not just mulch space, but actually able to see the soil a little bit. And this can be done in dusty corners or behind perennials or under shrubs, things like that. But when you have a little bit of bare soil, this allows the queen bumblebees to, when they come out very early in the spring, to pick good nesting sites so that they can start to burrow in and lay their little eggs and get ready to come out later in the springtime. So some of our bees are ground nesting bees and some are stem nesting bees. Not honeybees, which are European actually. Our native bees are the ones that are going to need these habitats, and they're usually a lot smaller and usually a little bit more endangered than honeybees. And the last thing you want to leave is the store without those fertilizers, plastic barriers, and landscape fabric. A lot of times, sales representatives will encourage you to fertilize going into the winter to get a strong plant for next year, or lay down that landscape fabric so you don't have to mulch. Well, what you're doing is just creating more future issues for yourself. Fertilizers are not actively being uptaken by plants right now. They're not growing, they're not using them, but they are running off into the water system, especially into ponds and things like that, which is why we see a lot of algae later on in the year. We see a lot of, down in the watershed, we see a lot of excess nitrogen, and then we end up having issues down the Chesapeake Bay. So we're all in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, so whatever we put into our landscape, if it doesn't stick around, it ends up in the water all the way down to the Chesapeake. So not fertilizing at this time of year because it's not going to be useful is really a good practice. And those plastic barriers and landscape fabrics, unfortunately, they just don't end up working. Over time, soil will build up on top of them, and then you'll end up having little weeds right on top of the fabric, and then they'll be pulling them out and disturbing that soil a lot. So our practice is to try to leave as many things as we can and not disturb things unnecessarily. So when we keep all of these things, it provides us with a lot of different things, not just pretty leaves on the ground. Adds organic matter to the soil, so it's habitat for those insects we talked about. It also provides insulation for newly planted plants and for roots. So rather than adding more mulch into your garden, you can use the leaves as a mulch, which is a great practice. You don't want a super thick layer, but just a 2 or 3 inch layer of leaves. You've got free mulch. So. You're also providing perching spots for birds to eat the seeds, but also to look around them and see other insects, other hunting opportunities, safety opportunities. So you're adding a lot more dynamics to your landscape. And winter interest, meaning color. We've got some grasses over here that
Really hold their color over the winter. And these I just picked out right in front of the hub. So you can come look at them later, but this is little blue stem. And so it's going to have this lovely purpley mauve color all winter long and be little tiny sparkly seed heads. And then we've got the pink and white muley grass, which are just beautiful, big, fluffy ones. They're on the hillside right by the pond. Both of these are native grasses and are going to provide a lot of cover and seeds and interest for our birds to use over the winter. So that's what when we say seasonal interest, it's that color, it's that structure that's standing up, it's
you know, if we ever get snow, how it looks underneath of the snow. So it's a whole other aspect of garden design. It adds another layer to the art of your space. And like I said, many landscape services that we pay for later, if we leave these snags, if we leave the leaves, if we leave, you know, the soil where it is, we're going to be getting a lot more benefits over time versus if you keep adding in things. It can be expensive and not very useful. So, and some of the insects that are here that overwinter in Virginia in our leaf litter are the Luna moth, different types of swallowtail butterflies, queen bumblebees, and lightning beetles. They all overwinter in the leaf litter. So ways we can keep these things around in our garden is, if we are going to be trimming our stems, I usually recommend to wait till springtime, but if we're going to trim the stems, trimming them at different lengths allows different types of insects to use the inside of the stem to lay their eggs. So it's very interesting. Certain insects will fly up at certain points or stay really low to the ground. So providing different heights between 8 and 24 inches will really help keep them, have enough different habitats to choose from. You can use, like I said, you can use the leaves as that free winter mulch. You can also border your wood line or border the edges of beds with like a nice, just 1 foot or so layer of leaves. And that way you're not covering up a lot of the perennials, but you're just showing there's an intention to this space. We came in, we made it look nice, we kept the leaves around, but there's definitely a reason that they're here. So you can also, if you have grass, especially grass that's been struggling to establish because you have really thin or not very fertile soil, adding a very light leaf layer on top of the grass can help insulate that soil and protect it, and as they break down, it'll add more soil on top of the grass. So you want to be able to see the blades of grass through it, but that light layer of leaves can actually help your turf out. So you can also compost the leaves later to mix into soil.
I love this. I used to work at a nursery and we used to sell so much of this. This is Leaf Grow, and it's the state of Maryland's leaves that they bagged up and processed and sold to the rest of the East Coast. So what you've got in this bag is just decomposing leaves that have been properly aged. You have the same thing in your landscape now, but we tend to give it away. So this is what I mix into the soil when I'm planting, especially around here because we've got lovely clay and it's rough. So this is just decomposing leaves, or decomposed leaves.
So we can incorporate seed bouquets as well into our landscape, which is kind of a fun idea that I got from Rebecca McMacken at the Highline Garden in New York. She does a really great talk about doing urban maintenance for a botanical garden, and one of the things she recommends is,
if you take your seed heads, you gather them up, you make nice little pretty things, and then you just stick them in the ground. And they'll stay upright, and the birds will be able to land on them and pick them off. They'll still have the seeds in the seed bank. You'll still be building up those seeds and competing with invasive species. But you're not looking at a scattered group of seeds. You're just seeing a nice bouquet, maybe hidden behind some grasses or things like that. Or you can take them, wrap them up a little bit, and use them as an edger along with the leaves. So there's lots of different ways to incorporate stems rather than just leaving them, but it is best to just leave them if you can.
and of course leaving snags, brush piles, and logs, or incorporating that into your design. Up here I have some takeaway notes for you all to look at, and one of them is from the Xerces Society. That's a little packet that talks about different things you can build in your landscape that provide habitat for bees and insects. And I usually recommend avoiding leaf blowers if you can. We don't necessarily have that option with our lovely grounds crew, but if you are lucky enough to be doing your own yard, or you have, you can speak with us about wanting them not to blow the leaves, and we can do our best, But I usually recommend avoiding the leaf blowers if you can. It's very disruptive, and again, we want to leave things as they are as long as we can. So when we're observing, just like this little bird is, what are we looking for? So So we're looking for signs of pests and disease. It's a lot easier to see injuries to branches or sores on the sides of trees where they're sapping. It's much, much easier to see problems in the winter than it is when everything is bustling and full of leaves and life and things like that. So looking around, looking at your big trees, looking for problems, dark spots near the base of trunks, just keeping an eye on things. You can also spot invasive evergreen plants a lot more easily. So if you're fighting honeysuckle, if you're fighting just something you don't want to see in your landscape, winter is usually a really good time to be like, there you are, I'm gonna get you. And make notes in your journal about how you're gonna manage that. You can note areas for improvement, like we said, lots of good ideas always pop up when the ground's bare. And you can see that those birds and that wildlife. Sometimes we miss what we're supporting and what we're bringing into a space by just focusing on the flowers and that seasonal beauty that we see when we want to be outside. But it's just important to look at your window and say, like, I planted that plant. That bird is here because he's eating that plant. I'm a part of this ecosystem too. So one thing with observing is you can do what's called a phenological journal, and it's when you are observing the climate and the animals in the area, and you're creating a journal that shows the relationship between them. So it's a mindfulness practice. You can do it alone or in groups, and you want to detail the temperature, how, if it's cloudy, if it's sunny, anything that's changing in the soil, seeking out signs of wildlife. And it's an important part of citizen science. A lot of data that we have about the climate has come from journals like this historically. So you could be doing a big service by keeping these records for people. So we're also going to be doing this with the art department in collaboration. In early January, we're going to offer up making journals, and then the next week we'll go on a walk with them and show you how to do this practice. So if you're interested in how to do a phenological journal, and it just allows you to compare years, it allows you to adapt, it shows you, hey, that thing that I did last year really did do something, or maybe it didn't, and now you can go back and reflect on that again. So a lot of garden maintenance is remembering what you did in the years past, and it can be really difficult to do that. And the last step in PLOP is prune. So what do we want to remove? So we want to, first of all, get out of there any of those spent, gooey, icky annuals. So if your plants, if your stems are upright and they look robust, you can keep them around, but if they look like this, or this, and they're gooey when you touch them, and they're cold and crinkly, they're not gonna come back, and they're not gonna be structurally sturdy enough to actually provide any habitat. So you can, without fear, get all of those things out of the way. So that's going to be a lot of your bulb foliage, irises, daylilies, other kinds of lilies, canna lilies. We have lots of canna lilies. Those are all going to be coming down. So they can be cut flat to the ground. They're not going to provide anything over the winter. So get those spent annuals or gooey plants out of there. You can seek out resources for specialty pruning. It's still a little bit too early to be doing things like pruning Japanese maples and roses and clematis. So if you have something like that, I do have some papers over here that will tell you the different types of hydrangeas and when to prune them and that kind of thing. So before you start cutting up those specialty plants, make sure you have a plan as how you want to do it. You want to avoid removing any flower buds that are already set on a plant. So camellias, hydrangeas, viburnums, those early spring bloomers, they already have those buds at the tips of their wood. So you're not gonna, if you cut them now, they're not going to be able to reset those flowers. And sometimes what happens is they'll actually get frozen off if we have a late frost. So, oops, sorry about that. If we have don't look now. So we want to avoid removing the flower buds. We don't want to ponytail grasses, which is when you gather up a grass and you chop it so it's got maybe 4 or 5 inches up still and it looks like it got a real bad buzz cut. So that's ponytailing. It's a really simple way to prune grasses. I usually recommend leaving up the grasses until the new foliage starts to come out on the base. When the when spring days are warm consistently, that's when I cut back my grasses because they're not gonna grow in until that time anyways, and you're just gonna have those strange little stumps until then. Yes, Jan?
Perhaps you could tell James River not to do that to the ones at the entrance.
James River is gonna love me because I have lots of things to tell them. Oh, I like that, elephant's feet. Yeah, they do. Yeah, that's a more traditional garden practice, and it is a little tough to bring people around. But don't worry, I will do my best for that because I love grasses. That's it. As a designer, meadows and things like that are one of the things that I find the most beautiful. So don't ponytail my grasses. And so once nights are below freezing and the foliage is yellow, then is when I recommend cutting back those non-native perennials, those hostas, lilies. They'll do a lot of the work for you. They'll go blah, and they'll go weak, and they won't be very well attached. So if you're struggling to prune off something that you know is going to be very easy to do in a few weeks, just wait a little bit. You may have to be outside when it's cold, but it'll save your back a lot. Let's see, so plants that have a year-round low-growing evergreen base or evergreen basal foliage, you're going to want to make sure that they do have some insulation, so it's best to leave their own stems and leaves on top of them if you can. So, for example, we've got some downy woodmint here,
And you can come and look at this later, but the yellowing older foliage is a lot larger leaves, but if we pull it back, you can see all these little bright green rosettes underneath here. If we cut this back right now, those tender leaves will be exposed to whatever weather comes by, and they will probably get damaged before spring because they are not as hardy as the outer leaves. So it can be a little unsightly. Sometimes I'll trim them back just so that it's like a nice little dome or looks a little bit neater. It's like it shows that you came in and you did something. You're not just letting it go. But leave something to protect it. It needs some kind of insulation. It doesn't need to be fully covered. You do want air to flow in and light to hit those leaves because they're still growing a little bit. But leaving something to cover it up is very helpful. Not to say that things will die if you cut them back, but you're just risking a little bit of stunting, a little bit of slowing it down overall.
So lots of our native plants will have these evergreen basal foliages like phlox, mountain mint, asters, goldenrod, coral bells, which I have an example tray of coral bells up here to show you. And many others will have these leaves at ground level, so that light layer can really provide the proper amount of insulation. So the rule of thumb is if the leaves aren't yellowing or they aren't browning, leave them alone. So I don't know, I'm a bit of a lazy gardener, so I'm always erring on the side of not working if we don't have to, because we have a lot of things to do in the garden already. So I like to say this is the beyond beautiful part. So we're looking beyond just what the beauty is in a garden. The flowers provide us lots of beauty, the branches provide us beauty, but they're beyond that. The bees use them as their habitat. They're providing a lot. So I just wanted to show you how the bees do that. I've got an example of some of the ground nesting bees. So that would be up there in that corner, and then on the other side is the stem nesting bees, and those are little bee babies. And that one has a bee climbing inside of it. So you'll be able to see at the ends of the stem, they'll block the end. They'll put a little piece of wood, or they'll put a little bit of mud or something like that. And so you'll know that hotel spot is occupied. So you have something going on there. And those are gonna be your really early pollinators and the beneficial insects that are gonna eat the bad bugs. So a lot of times, this is a landscape service we miss out on because small wasps and things they parasitize things like aphids and tomato hornworms and things like that. So later on in the year when we're, releasing ladybugs or lacewings to try to eat up all those other bugs, if we just make sure we have stems around, you won't have to spend that money. You have that naturally present in your landscape. So yeah, and that shows you cutting them at an 8 to 24 inch range, just an assortment of heights. It's a little bit difficult to see it, but that's the basal foliage of a Monarda plant. So just real quick, we're just remembering plop. We want to prepare, leave, observe, and prune. And other important notes is avoid excess fertilizing or dull tools. A dull tool is much more dangerous than a sharp tool. We want to redefine what we think of as beautiful. Grasses, seed heads, watching the birds in the winter, those are all beautiful things too. And we want to redefine our garden care schedule, let the weather dictate what we're doing. And you want to enjoy it. Enjoy what all your space offers. Don't take things away before you get to see what your garden's benefit is. So, yeah. Oops. I gotta stop leaning on stuff. Yes, but we're here to help you grow. So if anybody needs anything, this is my number for my office and my email. I also have my card up here. So I'll take questions now if anybody would be brave enough to ask one. So, yes, June.
I have a lot of flowering bushes.
Okay,
Do they get cut back in the fall or in the spring?
it's a great question. So lots of flowering bushes. So it's going to depend what type of flowering bush they are. If you see on the tips of the stem, if they already have set a bud, don't cut it back. But if there's nothing happening on there yet, try to identify it. If it's something like a spirea or a viburnum or something that's going to bloom really early in the year, I would err on the side of not pruning it. But if it's a later blooming one, you can prune it up to shape it and to aerate it, especially if you want to take out a few branches on the inside. But for shrubs, you don't usually have to prune them unless you're worried about them getting too large or that sort of shaping pruning. Anybody else have a question? Oh, nobody? You all know all this? Okay.
Hey, Katie, are we allowed to actually use leaves in the front yards of the cottages?
That is a great question.
Because
So,
otherwise I'm gonna start sneaking them in.
I would love to see more leaves used in the front of the cottages, especially because we don't usually do a remulching in the beginning of the year. That is something I'm currently discussing with James River, because they have such a large crew and they're out on site and we're not always around them. It can be a little tricky to catch them in the act or anything, but I would say the more people they see leaving leaves intentionally as mulch, the more emails I forward to them, the more likely we are to be able to keep doing that. And I think that's going to be a good practice for us. It'll save us, the mulch money. So we're getting rid of too many things. So that's a great question. That is the balance, that meeting in the middle, old standards versus new desires.
So considering that they blow dry, they blow anything,
Yes, anything that moves.
that's gonna be a hard thing.
It is. So the funny thing is about a lot of landscape care is that not many of them are gardeners. You would think that would go hand in hand, and usually it doesn't. There's got to be a way to bring them along the ride with us, to make them inspired to say, this is so important to us, and you are so important to us too. So I think that we just got to get them on board, and that is the biggest challenge of any gardener, is getting the landscaping crew to agree with you. So we're fighting a good fight, though. All right.
Those of us with raised beds.
Yes.
What can we be doing? I was there this morning and the leaves are all gone.
They're all gone.
Uh,
So with the raised beds, you can be planting cover crops. So carrots, onions, radishes are really great ways to break up your soil over the winter time. You can start them inside, but it can be a little tricky with carrots and things. So usually I'll just get a light sheet or a cool blanket, just something to cover it. You don't want plastic, you want the water to be able to breathe through the fabric, but you can do that and start root vegetables, beets too. Even if you don't eat them, even if you just chuck them into the compost, it's a great way to organically break up your soil without tilling it up and getting in there. So daikon radishes are particularly good for that, and early wonder beets, yeah. So for our gardeners out there, we'll also be doing a mushroom compost spruce up in the springtime for anybody in the resident garden beds. So that'll add some organic matter as well. So, any other questions or comments? Yes, Kay?
So, one of my favorite ways of dealing with raised beds is, legumes of almost any kind, especially on winter, you can
Oh, yeah.
actually use pea seeds.
That's a great point. I didn't.
Because they're cold weather, and then do not pull them up by the roots, clip them, leave the roots in there, because those roots have nitrogen fixing bacteria, which allows everything to do better nitrogen uptake. It's awesome, I'm sorry, I have hundreds of children, leave that, and show them where the little nodules are. It's really good, so when you get food, and you get.
Or flowers too.
And flowers, and you get fertility as well.
So for those of you that didn't hear, another really great cover crop is to do peas, because peas are nitrogen fixing, and what that means is that there's a bacteria in the soil that's associated with those roots that makes it so that nitrogen, the main chemical that plants use to grow their leaves and to grow, generally speaking, they make it available. So you can put as much fertilizer as you want into a garden bed, but if that bacteria association isn't available, those plants cannot use that nitrogen. So having things like legumes, peas, anything in that family is very, very helpful and beneficial. And the last thing she said was to not pull up the roots, is just to cut it back and to let the roots decompose into the soil because of those nitrogen fixing nodules on those roots. So legumes are really interesting. Baptisias are in the legume family as well. So if you like wild indigo, that's another nitrogen fixing plant. So you can add those plants into your regular perennial beds as well to help rehab your soil. So that's a great point. Thank you, Kay. Anybody else? Wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming and listening to me jibber jabber about gardening. And if you want to come up and take a look at any of the tools, books I have up here, or if you would like to take any of the materials home, please feel free. And thank you again.